let me give a little bit of a background to what we're going to be talking about tonight. The title of this is The Rosary en la Agrupación. And we'll talk a little bit about what that relates to, how that relates to us as the ACU, but really the talk is about the Rosary itself. But it's not a couple of things. It is not an exhaustive review of all of the publications that have come out from the Vatican on the Rosary, but you will see that there's a list included in the document or in the presentation that gives you all of the encyclicals and all of the papal documents that have been published over the years on the Rosary, which are numerous, right? It also has, the presentation has a lot of the structure and prayers and mysteries, which we all know and we have access to, and so I'm not going to delve on those components. They're here because this was designed originally to be a reference for those who were getting to know the Rosary. So that's why the prayers are there, the structure is there, et cetera, et cetera. We won't go into detail on that. Now, having said that, because there's a lot of background information, references, and so on related to the history of the Rosary, I want to make it available, the presentation, to anyone who wants a copy. Because again, we're not going to delve into all those specifics. So if you want a copy of the presentation after you're done hearing it and you're interested, either text me your email or email me, and I'll be glad to send you a copy of the presentation so you have a copy of it. So we begin with a little bit of history. But before we go into the history, I want to tell a story. Does anybody know why this is the month of the Rosary? Okay. Lepanto. That's very good, yes. So what happens? The October 7th was originally designated the day of Our Lady of Victory, not Our Lady of the Rosary. That changed over the years, and we'll see how and why. And by the way, let's go ahead and I'll be talking a little bit about the history and a little bit about the spirituality at the same time. I'll get that behind. Yeah, sorry about that. I like to move around. Sorry about that. I'm going to try to stay put here so that the folks online can hear us. So what happens? The change in the name occurs because of the emphasis that the church wanted to give. Rather than emphasizing the battle, the bloody battle that was Lepanto, the emphasis became what determined the outcome of the battle from the church's perspective. And what was it that we think determined the outcome of the Battle of Lepanto? The Rosary. Why and how? And I'm going to tell the story because it's not in the presentation, but it's an interesting background to why we're even talking about the Rosary in October. So what happens? There's a time in history, this is 1571, when the advance of the Ottoman Empire is threatening Christianity. Specifically, what had happened? Rhodes had fallen, right? And with the fall of Rhodes, the eastern control of the Mediterranean by the Christian navies had dissipated. At that point, the Ottomans became very emboldened, decided that they were going to pressure the Christian nations, particularly at that time, what was left of the Eastern Roman Empire, to give up Cyprus as well. And so they started threatening to either they gave up Cyprus and just handed it over to the Ottomans, or the Ottomans would invade Cyprus. This worried all of the Christian navies and the Christian nations, and particularly Pope Pius V. So, in response to the threats that were coming from the Ottomans, both by land and by sea, Pope Pius V tried to call together something he called the Holy League. And the Holy League was composed of the nations that had an interest in keeping the Ottomans from invading the rest of Europe. Now remember that at this time we'd also were close to losing Constantinople, right? And actually I think by 1571 we had lost Constantinople, because I think Constantinople fell in 1545. So Pope Pius V calls together the Holy League. Who are the Holy League? The nations that had navies that operated in the Mediterranean, who could try to block the Ottoman encroachment and the Ottoman takeover of Cyprus. And who were those nations? Principally Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, Genoa, Venice, some of the military orders, like the Knights of Malta, who still had warships, the Knights of St. Stephen, and a couple of other minor players. The Papal States, who contributed to this naval battle. So why are we going on about a naval battle when we're really talking about the Rosary? because when Pius V organizes the battle plan, he puts in charge of the Christian Navy, the Catholic Navy, Juan de Austria. Juan de Austria had a bastard brother of Philip II, King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor. He was one of the children of Carlos V, you guys may remember, of the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. Juan de Austria was an expert naval and battle general, and he becomes the leader of this group. Pope Pius V proclaims the Navy and the Armada and the battle to be under the protection of Our Lady of the Rosary. Indeed, it wasn't just Our Lady of the Rosary. Also, for example, one of the leaders, Andrea Doria, was carrying in his cabin on his ship a picture that had been drawn for him, one of the first drawings of the Manto de Guadalupe. So even Our Lady of Guadalupe was accompanying the Navy. But the Pope puts it under the protection of Our Lady of the Rosary, and Juan de Austria does something very interesting. He sends a priest to every single one of the 226 ships fighting on behalf of the Catholics, and has the priest confess every sailor, every soldier, and they have rosaries prayed by the entire cruise the night before the battle, right? So there's this dramatic spiritual intervention that the Pope insists on and that Juan de Austria commands, and he makes it happen by deploying clerics to each of the ships to make this possible. So this happens the night before the battle. Long story short, the battle opens, the winds are against the Catholics, and so on and so forth. They can't get their battle formation, the winds change. All of a sudden, they're in perfect battle formation. The battle begins. To make a very long story short, despite being outgunned 3-2 in ships and soldiers, the Catholics win. The Christian Navy wins. And one of the things that happened very early in the battle is that the center crosses with the Turkish center, with the Ottoman center, and Ali Pasha, who was the leader, he was the equivalent of Juan de Austria on the Ottoman side, one of the best naval admirals that they had ever had, dies in one of the first battles between ships. So the center, as you can imagine, a line of battle, the center ships up front with Juan de Austria and all the leaders of the Navy, the Ali Pasha and his guys on the other side, and 15 or 20 minutes into the battle, Ali Pasha falls, and the standard of the Moors falls, or of the Ottomans. And that demoralized the entire, and from there on out, it was a rout. It was basically a rout. Interesting, too, from a historical perspective, but also from a social justice perspective, these were oar ships at the time. It was the last big battle of oars. Now, who runs the oars on these ships that the Ottomans have? Slaves. And who were those slaves? Where were they from? Christian slaves. Christian slaves. So what happened was that when the battle began and they started boarding their ships, because back then, basically this was an army battle on ships, right? That's how these battles happened until later when the galleys came. What happened was they freed the slaves on the ships, armed them, and the slaves then started taking over ships themselves. And there were about half of the Ottoman ships that were taken over by the slaves, by the Christian slaves, and handed over or contributed to the battle on the side of the Christians. So very interesting history here. The Pope sees this as a miraculous event. And you can imagine when you're outnumbered, outgunned, and so on and so forth, it was a Hail Mary, if you will, from the perspective of the Catholic nations, and boom, they're able to win. And what had happened that was different than any other battle they had had with the Ottomans is that they had loaded the battle spiritually. The men had committed themselves. The men had, and you can imagine not just from the perspective of the appearance of that, but also how that has touched the hearts of these men that had to give their lives, if necessary, on behalf of the battle. So that's where all this comes from. That's where all this starts. So that's just the story of why today, in October, specifically October 7th, we're celebrating Our Lady of the Rosary, or what was then proclaimed Our Lady of Victory. Okay, so a couple of things just of, what is the Rosary? I think most of us obviously are familiar. We pray the Rosary before the Mass today. We do that on a weekly basis. The Rosary is an integral part of the ACU life. And I'm sorry, I just want to organize some papers. So, what is a rosary? Well, in 2002, Pope John Paul II proclaimed a new set of mysteries be added. We all know the 15 old mysteries. We added 5 more, the luminous mysteries. And over more than 4 centuries, several popes have been promoting the praying of the Rosary as an integral part of Christianity and meditation of the life of Christ. And if you look at the mysteries, we know that the mysteries relate to the life of Christ and sometimes to the role of Mary in the life of Christ. Participation in the life of Mary, whose focus was Christ. And that's one of the Mariological functions. And I apologize because I want to go back to the first page of that. So, originally, the Rosary was called the Psalter. I'm sorry, I skipped that slide. The Psalter of the Jesus. And by the way, what is a Psalter? The Psalter of Jesus and Mary. The Psalter is a prayer. It's a form of prayer that the church has used for a millennia. And we'll see a little bit about where the Rosary, the precedent to the Rosary existed before we actually received the Rosary. Set of prayers used in the Catholic Church with the 15 mysteries. We talked a little bit about the addition of the mysteries by the Pope. It wasn't until 1520 that Pope Leo X officially approved this for use in the Universal Church. And we'll talk a little bit about that because 1520 is 300 years after we received the Rosary itself, or after the Rosary is revealed, if you will, and we'll talk about that revelation. In 1569, a papal bull establishes the devotion to the Rosary across the Universal Church. So not only is it approved, it is now endorsed, if you will. In 1571 is when St. Pius V declares the first feast of the Holy Rosary. At that time, the feast of Our Lady of Victory, because that's the year that we win Lepanto. And then in 1917, the name is changed. That's when it happened. Our Lady of the Rosary is actually claimed by Fatima. The Virgin at Fatima declares herself the Lady of the Rosary, Our Lady of the Rosary. And by the way, that's one of the reasons that as the Rosary has evolved, we now find the Fatima prayer as part of the Rosary, because Fatima became integrally related to the Rosary. It was not at Fatima that the Rosary was revealed, but Our Lady proclaimed herself Our Lady of the Rosary at Fatima. So, what about the roots of the Rosary? Well, it happens that in the church, since the early Desert Fathers, there were methods of prayer that included beads and counting, and the number of much of what they did revolved around the number 150. And why the 150? Because of the Psalms, 150 Psalms. And so that became an understood or accepted practice within those with great devotions in the church, and evolved over time so that it wasn't just the Psalms that were being prayed 150 times on beads, but also the prayer of using, or the practice of using beads to do 150 Our Fathers. So you can see here that from the 3rd century, they were using either stones or beads or ropes to keep track of the 150 Psalms that they were reading or praying. There was various forms of the Jesus prayer, and then the Our Father became the common use prayer for that repetition and meditation. Now, as far as the Hail Mary actually evolved over time. And this was something that until I studied the Rosary, I really didn't really understand the origins of the Hail Mary, because, like I said, it at first was only a part of what the angel proclaimed to Mary. And then there was the addition of the saludo of Saint Elizabeth to Mary that was added to construct the full prayer. So it came together over 1,000 years. The earliest version simply had added Mary's name to the message delivered by the angel. So it was Hail Mary, that was the part that had been added, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Around 1050 AD, the words Elizabeth used to greet Mary were added. And that, we know that as blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb. By the way, thy womb, Jesus, had not been added yet. And that's from Luke 1:42. And then in 1261, 200 years later, the Pope added the concept of the specific name of Jesus being the fruit of the womb. And so that's when the name of Jesus was added. And then it became published, if you will, by Canisius, I think it's St. Peter Canisius, in 1555 in the Catechism. And at that point, we almost have a complete Hail Mary. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners. By the way, still not completed because at the hour of our death, it wasn't added until a little bit later, 11 years later. So 11 years later, when the Catechism of the Council of Trent is published, and who, by the way, Canisius was critical to the operation of the Council of Trent, he includes the entire final petition, adding now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And there we have the complete Hail Mary. That's when we finalize the prayer that we know today. So the version of Hail Mary we prayed today was given official approval in 1568. Again, evolving over almost 1,000 years, 1,500 years, if you think about the fact that it begins with the words of the angel to Mary in the time of Christ, or before Christ. Okay, so then a little bit on the history. In 1714, the church received the rosary in its present form. I'm sorry, in 1214. Now, this story is very interesting too, and this is where we're going to see the only, what I'm going to call, controversy associated with the rosary. And we'll get to why there's a little bit of controversy associated with the rosary. But what happened? So at that time in southern France, there was a heresy very similar to what Father described today, actually, as the heresy between good and evil. There was dualism, that was the Albigensian heresy. And in southern France, it began to become very prominent. And that heresy basically indicated that material was bad and evil, and spirit was good and salvific. And the two had nothing to do with each other. And there must be a good God making good things and a bad God making bad things. And so it created this terrible element of dualism. Plus, it started taking a lot of people away from the church, dropping from the church, not even beginning to practice Albigensianism, but actually leaving the church. So this was a terrible time in southern France for faith. So St. Dominic, at that time, Father Dominic, is sent by the Dominican order, or actually, I'm sorry, by his preceding order, to go and preach in southern France and try to bring them back. After weeks and months of trying to do that, he fails miserably. He cannot connect with the Albigensians. He cannot connect with the people that are losing their faith. He can't convince them. And in what seems to be a moment of desolation, Dominic goes into the woods. And he spends days in the woods praying and asking and begging for assistance from the Holy Mother in trying to accomplish his mission, which is to convert these Albigensians who are destroying the faith in southern France. And as the legend has it, the Holy Mother appears to him. And she says, you will use a weapon that we have and that we proclaim so that you can have these individuals pray this particular prayer, which was the rosary. And with that weapon, we will defeat the principalities of evil that are challenging the church and challenging the faith, right? And so there's a little bit more detail here. I probably didn't tell the story completely well, but it was given to Saint Dominic, who received it from the Blessed Virgin as a means of converting in the 1200s. The Albigensians, again, believed in two gods, one good, one evil, and separation between good and evil. The story, by the way, is told in the book that was written by Blessed Alan de la Roche, who wrote a biography of St. Dominic. So Our Lady appeared to him with three angels and said, "Dear Dominic, do you know," by the way, he was in desolation. This is one of those cases, just like we saw happen to St. Ignatius in that time of spiritual crisis when he was given a consolation that brought him to an understanding and enlightenment in the church, an epiphany. St. Dominic received that kind of epiphany when he received a response from Our Lady in helping him to be able to accomplish what in his heart he thought he needed to do. "Dear Dominic, do you know which weapon the Blessed Trinity wants to use to reform the world?" "Oh, my Lady," answered St. Dominic, "you know far better than I do, because next to your Son, Jesus Christ, you have always been the chief instrument of our salvation." And Our Lady replied, "I want you to know that in this kind of warfare, the principal weapon has always been the angelic psalter. That's, again, angelic prayer, which is the foundation stone of the New Testament. Therefore, if you want to reach these hardened souls and win them over to God, preach my psalter, her psalter, right? The Rosary of Our Lady. So from there, he arose comforted with zeal and went on to the cathedral. Unseen, and again, this is the legend, the unseen angels, presumably the three that appeared with Our Lady, rang the bells to gather the people in the square, and St. Dominic began to preach. A terrible storm broke out while he was preaching, and apparently there was an earthquake, there was a partial eclipse, thank you, and there was thunder and lightning, and everybody was very afraid. By that time, they had all gathered in the square. Looking at a picture of Our Lady exposed in a prominent place, they saw her raise her arms to heaven 3 times to call down God's vengeance upon them if they failed to be converted, to amend their lives, to seek the protection of the Holy Mother of God. This is that little controversial part of this, because the way that Dominic described it and that his biographer described it, Our Lady was ready to call on God to bring vengeance. And what, by the way, we don't know exactly what that means, right? We don't know if that's some sort of more physical understanding, more thunder, lightning, and hail, or something like that. But it is an indication of the commitment that Our Lady had to help solve this problem of faith. And again, the controversy is in the words that are used in the description, which relates to bringing vengeance upon the people if they don't convert in their hearts. But it's understood Mary was defending the faith in her son, right? So God wished by means of these supernatural phenomena, and again, this is in some ways relates to what we saw in Fatima, right? Where we saw supernatural phenomena occur that were witnessed by hundreds and thousands of people. Something similar had happened here. I think the city, by the way, was Toulouse, if I'm not mistaken. And so at the prayer of St. Dominic, when he begins the Psalter, the storm ends and he preached. Almost all the people here at Toulouse embraced the Rosary at that time and renounced their false beliefs. So this is the actual origin of the Rosary. Where did we get the Rosary? How did the Rosary come to be? It came to be from a revelation that was given to Saint Dominic during a desolation, in order to allow him to be able to convert the heretics in southern France. So, encyclicals. I just want to mention this one, and again, I'm going to give you a list, and you'll see there's a list in the document, so if you ever want to look up the documents of the Vatican and the popes on the Rosary, you'll see them. But this one in particular basically reminds us that piety, faith, and union began to return as a consequence of the prayer of the Rosary. And that is what we see today being espoused by so many leaders in the church and bishops in response to some of the challenges that we have today. Those challenges being sometimes heresies, sometimes inappropriate attacks on the church, issues of morality, issues of loss of faith, comes from this belief that the weapon that was given to us by the Holy Mother is something that even today can help us to overcome these challenges to our faith. And by the way, just the other day, I don't know if you saw that there had been an issue with a governor who apparently gave a fake communion with a Dorito to some advocate or something like that, which caused a big scandal because it was an incredibly inappropriate video basically mocking the administration of a sacrament of the Catholic Church. And the response from the bishop and leaders in that area was to hold a rosary forum. And they had some 300 people who gathered at the home of the individual to pray the rosary. And by the way, very Christian, very Catholic in its response, because they weren't praying for this person to not be governor anymore or whatever. They were praying for the soul of this individual to be saved. So here we get into some of the things that I mentioned that we're not going to spend too much time on because most of us are familiar with it, and if we're not, we certainly have access to that on web and certainly in the presentation. set of instructions on how to do it, what the mysteries are. I did want to read the comment from Fatima, because this is a quote from Our Lady of Fatima, transmitted to us by the children, where she said, "Say the rosary every day, pray and pray a lot, and offer sacrifices for sinners." In a way, that's what we're seeing that we were just describing. "I am Our Lady of the Rosary. Only I will be able to help you. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Our Lady of Fatima." So there's hope in that, right? Because we know that the church is challenged. We know that this is a perpetual battle, if you will, and we see it in St. Paul's writings. I think it was Corinthians 6:12, that we're fighting the principalities of evil, and that this battle will go on forever. The battle, I think we heard Father talking about concupiscence versus the spirit, etc., is something that humanity will fight until the end of the world. But our Mother gives us great hope, because she has already proclaimed that she will prevail. Then there are the prayers, and again, I'm going to pass on the prayers since we know most of those. The mysteries we talked about. I did want to talk a little bit about indulgences, right? So the church has proclaimed indulgences in relation to the use of the rosary. And it's interesting because there's partial indulgences associated with the personal use of the rosary in one's life. But there are full indulgences, and again, these indulgences are based on the usual criteria of confession and communion within the time within a reasonable time of the rosary. But the fact here is it says, "A plenary indulgence is granted if the rosary is recited in a church, in a public oratory, or in a family group, a religious community, or pious association." And so that is one of the messages that the church is using to bring us together, to pray together, right? So the full indulgence is associated with praying the rosary with others. And it can be in a family, it doesn't have to be, a large group, but certainly this group qualifies, a church qualifies, any religious group would meet that requirement. And again, remember that the indulgences always require the other aspects as well. Okay, so here, I just want to give you a view of all the documents that I was talking about. So you can see that Pope Leo VIII has a number of documents. Most of those are from the 1800s. We have the Pope Pius XI, 1937, Pope Pius XII, 1951, and most recently, Pope John XXIII in 1959. And there are the names of the documents. And again, if you request a copy, you'll see the complete list if you have an interest in going deeper into this. I won't get into the mysteries. Again, we know those. But I do want to talk a little bit about the promises that Our Lady made, particularly to St. Dominic, which are not very well publicized. And again, until I began to study the Rosary, and this study began probably in earnest about 5 years ago when we were preparing material, 4 years ago, when we were preparing materials for the young professional group to help them understand the role of the Rosary and why we use it in the Agrupación and what it means to us and what its history in the church is, discovered that there were 15 promises that were made to St. Dominic and to Blessed Alan de la Roche associated with the use of the Rosary. Now, as with many things in the church, a little bit of this may be legend, right? On the other hand, the Dominicans really understand this as part of the revelation that they received and part of the importance of using the Rosary in the church. And that's why the Dominicans have been such advocates for the use of the Rosary since it was revealed to St. Dominic. So, what are the 15 promises? "Whoever shall faithfully serve me by the recitation of the Rosary shall receive powerful graces. I promise my special protection and the greatest graces to all those who shall recite the Rosary." So that's a special protection of our Mother. "The Rosary shall be a powerful armor against hell. It will destroy vice, decrease sin, and defeat heresies. It will cause virtue and good works to flourish. It will obtain for souls the abundant mercy of God. It will withdraw the hearts of people from the love of the world and its vanities, and it will lift them to the desire of eternal things. Oh, that souls would sanctify themselves by this means. The fifth one, the soul which recommends itself to me by the recitation of the Rosary shall not perish. That's the soul, shall not perish. Whoever shall recite the Rosary devoutly, applying himself to the consideration of its sacred mysteries, shall never be conquered by misfortune. God will not chastise him in his justice. He shall not perish by an unprovided death. If he be just, he shall remain in the grace of God and become worthy of eternal life. Whoever shall have true devotion for the Rosary shall not die without the sacraments of the Church. Those who are faithful to recite the Rosary shall have during their life and at their death the light of God and the plenitude of his graces. At the moment of death, they shall participate in the merits of the saints in paradise. I shall deliver from purgatory those who have been devoted to the Rosary. The faithful children of the Rosary shall merit a high degree of glory in heaven. You shall obtain all you ask of me by recitation of the Rosary. All those who propagate the Holy Rosary shall be aided by me in their necessities. I have obtained from my divine Son that all the advocates of the Rosary shall have for intercessors entire celestial court during their life and at the hour of death. All who recite the Rosary are my children and brothers and sisters of my only Son, Jesus Christ. And devotion of my Rosary is a great sign of predestination. And again, I apologize for reading these, but I think it is a powerful message on the importance of the Rosary and one of the reasons why in the Agrupación we have been devoted to the Rosary from our foundation. So with that, I conclude what is a brief summary of the history and the role and the benefits of the prayer of the Rosary, and would open up to any questions that pose it.
From the name of Psalter to Rosary, what's the founding of where the Rosary came from?
So Rosary comes from the word rosarium, and it was associated with the circle of roses that was associated with the beads that were used. There's actually a reference to that, so if you'll give me just a second, I will bring us back to that reference. And I didn't emphasize that, and perhaps I should have. I apologize, I can't find it right now, but I will find it at some point and get back to you on that. It has to do with the roses.
Got about 10 slides back.
10 slides back, yeah? You saw it. Okay, dime, si lo ves, César, me dejas saber. One more. I don't, do you see it here? Oh, back another one, sorry. One more back. Okay. You saw it? There it is, the Holy Rosary, thank you, yes. The Holy Rosary, Latin Rosarium, in a sense, the crown of roses or the garland of roses, also known as Dominican Rosary or simply the Rosary, refers to the set of prayers and the string of knots or beads used. So at some point it was given that name based on probably the roses being used as part of the creation of the rosaries. By the way, having come back recently, actually the young professionals can tell you about this from Lourdes. One of the things that I brought back for the guys was the rosaries that they produce in Lourdes, which are using rose petals, as again, as a reflection of that history and that connection of the Rosarium.
And then the other question I had was, I was blessed to be able to be in what's the title of the battle that you just said?
El Lepanto.
No, right, but the Rodan, is it? No, it's in Turkey.
So in Turkey, Constantinople, Istanbul.
No, you said it, and I was there. It's in Greece. No,
So in Greece, it would have been Lepanto, which is outside of Corinth.
Rhodes. There we go.
Ah,
Fallen
the
Rhodes.
island of Rhodes.
The Isle of Rhodes. And it's a very big medieval town, and they were selling these beads. And I started talking about, and somebody saw me my rosary. He's like, oh, that's like our beads too. And what I didn't understand was that the beads had come from before, even though there was the argument that, oh, we stole it from them, and then they stole it from us.
Okay, so to clarify that, I do
It was a very
wish
interesting conversation.
I do wish to clarify that. The beads in the Catholic Church, the Christian Church, at that time the Christian Church was all Catholic, began in 300, in the year 300, 350. The Muslims didn't exist at that time. The Prophet had not been born. There was no Islam. So you can just push them aside from the perspective of the historical contribution to the Rosary. Then you could argue that the Hindu were somehow involved because the Hindus actually also used beads. Apparently, they had no influence on Christianity at all at that time because there was almost no connection. The road, had not been opened and so on and so forth, although it is said that at least one of the apostles went to Ceylon to preach. And do you guys remember who it was? Was it St. Thomas that went to Ceylon and actually founded a Christian church? To India, yes. Ceylon was part of India at that time, yeah. Ceylon's the big island that's right off the coast of India and founded Christianity there. What's that, Jay?
I think it's now Sri Lanka.
Yes, now it's Sri Lanka. The island of Ceylon is now the country of Sri Lanka. Yes, very good. Yeah, with the
I wish I would have known that.
with the Muslims, I don't let them get away with the bead thing because it's just you guys didn't exist. Sorry. So now by 1271, when the Battle of Lepanto happens, they are in full flourish. But
Now, the Muslims beats, what they do is they just repeat all the attributes of Allah, who is God. Has nothing to do with Our Lady, even though Our Lady is venerated in the Quran. Is the only woman mentioned in the Quran. But what they do when they pray is just mention the attributes,
Right.
which, by the way, they're not very they're consistent. They could be good and bad because it depends how Allah feels.
Okay.
He all merciful, but also the God of war and
Right.
so on.
Any other? Yes, Francisco.
How about the luminous mysteries?
What about them?
Luminous, introduced by Pope.
Yes, so we mentioned that Pope John Paul II added the 5 luminous mysteries, gave them one day. The other mysteries all have 2 days in the week. The luminous have the one, I think it's Thursday, that is the one day for the luminous mysteries. But it was, I think, from his perspective, a missing part of the life of Christ, right? And I think that's why it was decided to be added. And there have been additions. I mean, frankly, the Rosary has evolved. There's no doubt about it. We know that the prayers in the Rosary have evolved. Even the Hail Mary has evolved since 1271. We saw that history of the Hail Mary evolving all the way through the Council of Trent and thereafter. With the Rosary itself, we've seen the addition of the Fatima prayer, which was not an original part of the Rosary. We've seen the addition of La Salve, which was not an original part of the Rosary. We've seen the addition of the Luminous Mysteries, which were not an original part of the Rosary. And again, that corresponds to the teaching magisterium and grace of the Church to try to continue to edify the faithful in the life of Christ, in Mary's role in the Church, and so on. So I see that as just as we've evolved with some of our dogma, as the Church has come to understand more about the role of Mary specifically.
Yeah, is this working?
Sí, serio.
From a practical point of view, I am one of the oldest over here, so I'm going back to Cuba. In Cuba, we pray the Rosary in La Agrupación every day because we met every day. I did it for many years, and then suddenly, after I finished college and so on, I stopped doing it. The reason I went back to the Rosary was because somebody sent me an app of the virtual Rosary in which you pray the Rosary and you pray each one of the prayers, Hail Mary, have a little bit of a meditation. At the beginning, I decided to do only one mystery. And I'm so grateful for the person that gave me that, because eventually I did 2 mysteries, and then I went to 3,
Right.
and then I did the whole thing, because what the hell. But I think it is important for those of us which are not doing it now, that maybe if they don't feel like doing the whole rosary, that start, and eventually they might get into the whole situation of being a necessity in your life.
That's a great comment, and I'll even add that there is precedent of devotion to the rosary where a decade at a time is prayed during the day, as opposed to, committing the time that it takes to do the 5 decades of the usual daily rosary. Again, from a devotional perspective, if you do 10 Hail Marys in the morning and you do 10 Hail Marys in the afternoon, and you come to complete at the end of the day, you've done your rosary that day, and that is an established form of praying the rosary. So there are ways to pray the rosary that are less consuming. For me, I'll tell you, my experience has been the car. The car to me has been the place where I find that I'm focused, that I have solace. And then the other thing that I discovered recently, and I think Cesar, you were the one that might have brought it, or someone that you got, was the Padre Pio Hail Mary meditations. So within the meditation of the mystery, there was a meditation for each of the Hail Marys within the decade, which is available, I think, online as the Padre Pio Rosary. Efrain.
I wanted to give a witness to a grace received, which involved my Argentinian wife. I was brought up in Catholic school to the age of 11, and then I was sent to the States, and I never went back to church until 19 years after I was married. Even though my Argentinian wife went to church every Sunday for 1,000 times without me. And anyway, she brought me back to the church. I had a conversion, she brought me back to the church. And then moving forward, our son, already as a grown-up, developed a very delicate, we learned, he had it already, a delicate condition that the operation could have left him either dead or possibly to have to be fed through a tube for the rest of his life. And I started praying the rosary every day. So I walked every day and I prayed her every day, asking for peace and accepting whatever God wanted. And I received that grace. And I went back to my wife, Argentinian wife, who had brought me back to church. She had never missed a Sunday Mass. And I said to her, I've been gifted a grace, and I'm accepting whatever happens. It's okay with me. Oh my God, that Argentina went crazy on me. How can you say that? How can you say that about your son? I was given a grace that she, through the rosary, that she didn't have through 1,000, what was it, 1,000? Yeah, 1,000 masses that I didn't attend. So that's my witness.
I think it's a worthy opportunity to remind everyone that we are a Marian congregation. And as a Marian congregation, one of the responsibilities, commitment, if you want to call it, when you consecrate your life to Mary, is that you're going to pray the rosary daily. I mean, obviously, with the many activities we're involved, we have to, take the option of a decade now, a decade later. Some can do it at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day. But it's important that we need to refresh in our minds that ACU is ACU because it's a Marian congregation. As a Marian congregation, this is our shield. This is our everyday prayer. This is what we directly, knowingly or not knowingly, committed to do.
Very good. It reflects also on the use of the ACU, not only in our personal lives, but also in our ACU life. And obviously you see it on, Wednesdays before the Mass. There are a number of agrupados that gather to do the rosary together. And again, that actually fulfills the indulgence requirement we were talking about. But in addition to that, most of the meetings of the agrupación that don't occur in the context of a Mass are preceded by a rosary. And so, or something similar. For example, the Litany of Our Lady, or the readings from the Little Book of Mary. But the rosary is an important part of almost every meeting in the agrupación where we don't have a Mass preceding the meeting. So for example, the ACU in Atlanta, before it meets, has a rosary. The ACU in Houston, before it meets, does the rosary, and so on. Jamal?
Thank you for the presentation, Manny. I had a question about the rosary ring. Do you know like the lineage of that?
I don't, Jamal. I don't know where that comes from. I'm assuming that it's a devotional associated with the rosary, but Father, I don't know if you know the rosary ring. There's a ring that is, no, mira, he had, let me see, Jamal. Does anybody know anything about this? Because I'm not familiar with it. I think this is very similar, thank you, Jamal. This is very similar to the small rosaries that we find that has a little cross and then you put it in your pocket. And it is a way of doing the rosary and counting. So I do use the little one, the little metal one with the cross on the side, which is similar to that. And I think that's just a tool to be able to do the rosary without having to carry the big rosary around.
It could be considered a marketing strategy.
Yes, exactly.
Carry the whole rosary, you probably
That's right.
Manny, I believe I read somewhere that in the 16th century, during the persecution, Catholics preferred to carry something they could hide, and than to carry the rosaries.
So
I
that
don't
could
know if
have,
that's a legend.
no, that could
But
have been
they date back from the 13th century, but
So if it's associated
in order
with
to protect themselves, they will carry the ring.
If it's associated with the 16th century, it would make sense because it was in the 16th century that the Protestant revolutions and Reformation began to take power. And there were many locations where Catholics were persecuted by the Reformists, including areas of Germany, obviously when Henry VIII, does what he does in England. The lowlands, the Netherlands and the Dutch and so on and so forth. There were a number of places where the Catholics were persecuted. So it would make sense if it was in the 1500s. And notice the struggle for the church in the 1500s, because that's the battle with the Ottomans trying to destroy Christianity is happening at the same time that within Christianity we're having the crisis of the Protestant Reformation. So it was a very difficult time for the church.
Let me add a couple of comments on some of the things that have been said. But first, I want to go back to Life magazine, en la portada. Life magazine. Jesuits throwing away the rosary. And the article said, that's a no prayer, it's ineffective, and everything. That really, to some extent, had a tremendous impact on me because I used to pray the rosary when I was in Belém, and I pray the rosary at home because my parents pray the rosary every day at 7:30. It was not until 1989 when I went to Medjugorje that it really hit me with a 2x4 about the importance and the message of the importance of a rosary. And I prayed in the car like you do. But to keep my attention, now I'm glad you mentioned the meditation of Father Pio. I use a scriptural rosary that I found in YouTube, and there they are. Right. And you pray it, and then you can keep your focus. It takes 5 more minutes than just praying Hail Mary, full of grace, because to me, that can be a little boring. But I suggest that there is a lot of, if you guys get distracted like I do, pray the scriptural rosary.
So I'm glad you brought that up because there are various forms of the rosary that acoplan the spirituality or the necessities of the faithful. So one of the things that I use from time to time when I'm in a hurry is something that's available on YouTube that's called the Fast Rosary. And that's actually how I learned to pray the Rosary. I learned to pray the Rosary, Dios te salve María, llena de gracia, el Señor es contigo, bendita tú eres entre todas las mujeres, bendito el fruto de tu vientre Jesús, Santa María, Madre de Dios, ruega por nosotros. That's how I learned to pray the Rosary when I started. And there's a version on YouTube that's called the Fast Rosary, and you can do it. It's actually by ¿cómo se llama? By day, by set of mysteries, right? So you can do the luminous, you can do whatever you want, and it's available on YouTube. So for those of you that are looking for the opposite, which is the very focused, very intense, very rapid rosary, again, it takes a little bit of concentration to be able to do that. And I can't use it all the time, but I do it from time to time, and it's 10 minutes or something. It's really rapid.
I just wanted to remind people that there is the Knights of Columbus and the Coral Gables have what they call a public square rosary, and they meet there on the last Saturday of the month, and that Ponce de Leon Park, which is like between Coral Way and right in front of that brand new building. Well, not so brand new, about 4 or 5 years, and they meet there, and I've seen some of us in there, so some of our mis compañeros here have met them there, so that would be a nice way. I think the advantage of that is that it's a way of showing the world that
Yes.
Hey, we exist, we're here,
Right.
and we're gonna get you.
Right.
Okay.
In a good way, in a good way, in a positive way. All right, thank you guys. Thank you.